October 18th, 1992. The crisp autumn air of Wyoming carried a familiar chill, a harbinger of the harsh winter that would soon blanket the remote landscapes. But for David King, a local diver, this particular October afternoon held a different kind of cold, a bone-deep realization that would send shivers far beyond the bite of the wind. King was conducting a routine training exercise in the vast, shimmering expanse of Boysen Reservoir, a man-made lake carved into the Wind River Canyon, its waters known for their deceptive depths and hidden secrets. As he descended into the murky embrace of the reservoir, the usual aquatic detritus gave way to something far more substantial, something wholly out of place in this underwater world. 19 feet below the surface, half buried in the silty bottom, lay the unmistakable outline of an automobile. Not just any car, but a Ford Maverick. Its once vibrant paint dulled by years of submersion, its windows opaque with the accumulation of time and sediment. This discovery, seemingly random, would ignite a cold case that had haunted the small town of Lander, Wyoming, for over a year. A mystery surrounding the vanishing of a young, dedicated nurse, Amy Wroe Bechtel. When word reached the Fremont County Sheriff's Department, a team was quickly assembled. The task was fraught with difficulty. The reservoir's depths were notoriously challenging, its currents unpredictable, and the visibility often poor. But the potential significance of this find was undeniable. Could this be Amy Bechtel's car, the very vehicle she was last seen driving on that fateful day in July of 1991? Investigators, their faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and grim determination, watched as specialized equipment was brought to bear. Cables were carefully positioned. Divers worked with methodical precision in the frigid water, and slowly, agonizingly, the submerged Maverick began its ascent. The tension on the surface was palpable. A collective breath held as the waterlogged vehicle finally broke the surface, dripping with the reservoir's ancient secrets. The first official confirmation came shortly after. The license plates, though faded, matched the registration for a 1980 Ford Maverick, the exact model Amy Bechtel owned. The small town's hopes, which had flickered and dimmed over 15 long months, suddenly reignited with a desperate, terrifying intensity. But this was not the end of the mystery. It was merely a new, chilling beginning. The implications of finding the car in the reservoir were profound, instantly shifting the narrative from a simple missing person case to something far more sinister. How did it get there? Was Amy inside? Or had someone else driven it into the watery grave? The questions multiplied, each more unsettling than the last, as the true weight of David King's discovery began to settle upon the community. The Ford Maverick, now a silent, rusted testament to a day gone horribly wrong, was carefully towed ashore, its secrets still tightly held within its waterlogged shell. This was the first concrete piece of evidence in a case that had, until this moment, been defined by its agonizing lack thereof. It was a tangible link to a woman who had simply vanished, leaving behind a bewildered husband, grieving parents, and a town gripped by fear and speculation. The discovery in Boysen Reservoir was not just about a car. It was about the profound silence it broke, the whispers of a terrible truth that had patiently waited beneath the surface, poised to reshape everything the community thought it knew about Amy Wroe Bechtel's disappearance. The vehicle, a symbol of her independence, now lay before them, a haunting monument to her absence, forever bound to the enigma of her final moments. Amy Wroe Bechtel, a vivacious and accomplished 24-year-old nurse, was last seen on July 24, 1991. The day had begun like any other, imbued with the hopeful ordinariness of summer in Wyoming. She had plans to scout for locations for a powerlifting competition, a passion she shared with her husband, Steve Bechtel. It was an activity that spoke to her disciplined nature, her drive, and her love for the outdoors. She was an avid runner, known for her early morning jogs, a familiar sight to many in Lander. On that fateful Wednesday, she had reportedly told her husband that she was heading out to look for suitable spots along a remote stretch of highway, US 287, north of Lander. Steve, a climbing guide, was also busy that day, driving a client to Fremont Peak, one of Wyoming's majestic summits. The couple's lives were intertwined, active and adventurous, a picture of youthful promise. But by evening, when Amy failed to return home, a knot of unease began to tighten in Steve's stomach. Initially, there was a quiet worry, easily dismissed as a delayed errand or an unexpected detour. Perhaps she had lost track of time. But as the hours stretched and the night deepened without a trace of Amy or her distinctive Ford Maverick, the worry curdled into genuine alarm. The subsequent morning, July 25th, Steve reported his wife missing to the Fremont County Sheriff's Department. The initial response was swift, yet hampered by the vast, unforgiving landscape of Wyoming. The area around Lander is a rugged tapestry of mountains, dense forests, and expansive wilderness, a place where a person or a car could vanish without a trace. Search parties were organized, composed of local law enforcement, volunteers, and search and rescue teams. They combed the desolate highways, hiked through the wilderness areas Amy was known to frequent, and even scoured popular climbing spots. Posters bearing Amy's warm, smiling face and the description of her car were plastered across Lander and surrounding towns. The entire community, initially united in a shared sense of hope, slowly began to descend into a collective dread as days turned into weeks and weeks bled into months without a single credible lead. The Bechtel home, once a hub of youthful energy, became a place of agonizing anticipation, each passing day bringing more despair. Amy's parents, anxiously awaiting news, traveled to Lander, their hearts heavy with unspoken fears. The silence from the wilderness was deafening, offering no answers, only an oppressive void. Investigators meticulously retraced Amy's last known movements. They interviewed everyone who might have seen her, seeking any scrap of information, any fleeting detail that could illuminate her path. The gas station attendant who recalled her stopping for fuel, the local shopkeeper who thought he saw her car. Each lead was pursued with dwindling hope. The description of her vehicle, a faded beige 1980 Ford Maverick, became a central point of focus. It was a common car, yet distinctive enough to be noticed in a small town. The mystery deepened with each unanswered question. Why had she disappeared? Had she met with an accident in the remote terrain? Or had something more sinister occurred, a possibility that grew more unsettling with every passing day? The vastness of the wilderness, once a source of comfort and adventure for Amy, now seemed to mock their efforts, swallowing her whole without leaving a trace. The search continued, albeit with waning resources and increasing desperation. Aerial searches were conducted, scanning the sprawling landscape from above, but the dense tree cover and mountainous terrain offered no easy answers. The riverbeds and remote trails were examined, but revealed nothing. The case began to gather dust, gradually fading from the daily headlines, yet it never truly left the collective consciousness of Lander. The void left by Amy Wroe Bechtel's disappearance remained, a gaping wound in the heart of the community, a constant nagging reminder of the unknown. The initial hope that she had simply wandered off, or perhaps chosen to leave, slowly gave way to a chilling realization. This was not a simple missing persons case. Amy Wroe Bechtel had not just gone missing, she had seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a growing sense of unease that permeated the quiet, unassuming town. The retrieval of the Ford Maverick from Boysen Reservoir on October 18, 1992, was a moment charged with both profound relief and chilling revelation. As the vehicle was carefully brought to shore, still dripping with the dark, cold waters of the reservoir, a palpable tension hung in the air. Investigators, their movements precise and deliberate, approached the car, their faces grim. The exterior offered little in the way of immediate answers. The car was heavily rusted, encrusted with algae and sediment, a testament to its long submersion. The impact of the water and time had thoroughly ravaged any superficial clues that might have been visible, but it was what lay, or rather, did not lay, within the car that struck the first devastating blow. As the doors were carefully opened, revealing the waterlogged interior, a collective gasp might have been heard had it not been for the investigators' steely focus. The front seats, the back seats, the trunk, all were empty. There was no sign of Amy Wroe Bechtel. The absence of her body, or any personal effects inside the car, immediately complicated the narrative. This was not a simple accident, where a driver had veered off the road and drowned. The car had been deliberately driven into the reservoir, or perhaps rolled in, but Amy was not with it. The implications were chilling. If Amy wasn't in the car, where was she? And who had put the car there? This discovery launched the investigation into an entirely new, far more disturbing direction, away from an accident and squarely into the realm of foul play. The Maverick was painstakingly processed, a forensic deep dive into its waterlogged secrets. Every inch of the car was examined, photographed, and catalogued. Specialized teams carefully drained the interior, sifting through layers of silt, debris, and marine life that had made the car its home for over a year. The hope was that some minute detail, some overlooked clue, might have survived the ravages of time and water. Investigators searched for any sign of struggle, any fingerprint, any DNA evidence that could point to the perpetrator. They looked for signs of forced entry, bullet holes, or blood. But the water had been an effective cleanser, obscuring much of what might have been there. Despite the challenges, a few significant details did emerge. The car's transmission was found to be in neutral, and the parking brake was disengaged. This suggested that the vehicle had either rolled into the water or had been driven in and then deliberately placed in neutral rather than crashing in gear. These subtle findings hinted at a calculated act, not a tragic accident. The car's location itself was also telling. Boysen Reservoir, while vast, had relatively few accessible entry points that would allow a vehicle to be driven directly into the water without drawing significant attention. The spot where the Maverick was found was isolated, suggesting a degree of planning and familiarity with the area. The reservoir became a focal point for subsequent searches. Divers returned to the depths, meticulously sweeping the area around where the car was discovered, hoping to find Amy's remains or any personal items that might have been ejected from the vehicle during its submersion. The cold, dark waters yielded no further secrets. The investigation pivoted, now focused on understanding how the car got into the reservoir and, more importantly, who was responsible. With Amy's body still missing, the case remained shrouded in agonizing uncertainty. Was she kidnapped? Murdered? Had she escaped the car before it entered the water? The discovery of the car, instead of providing closure, had only deepened the mystery, confirming the darkest fears of her family and the community. The Ford Maverick, once a symbol of everyday life, now stood as a silent, rusted monument to a crime yet unsolved. Its presence in the reservoir, a chilling testament to the calculated actions of an unknown assailant. The questions lingered, heavy and persistent, demanding answers that the waterlogged vehicle could not provide. The shift from a missing person case to a suspected homicide, initiated by the discovery of Amy's car, brought forth a renewed and intensified scrutiny upon those closest to her. In investigations of this nature, statistically, the spouse is often the first and most thoroughly examined individual. Steve Bechtel, Amy's husband, found himself at the center of this grim spotlight. Before the car was found, Steve's account of Amy's last known movements had been the primary source of information, and it had largely been accepted. He had reported her missing, participated in searches, and outwardly displayed the grief and desperation of a husband whose wife had vanished. However, the discovery of the Ford Maverick in the reservoir, with no trace of Amy inside, cast a pall of suspicion over his earlier narrative. His claim that Amy had gone to scout for powerlifting locations along US 287 now seemed less credible if her car ended up in Boysen Reservoir, miles away from that stated destination, and in a manner that suggested foul play. Detectives began to re-interview Steve, poring over his initial statements with a fine-tooth comb, searching for inconsistencies, gaps, or anything that might betray a hidden truth. They questioned his timeline for July 24, 1991, and July 25, when he reported her missing. Every detail, no matter how small, was examined. Was his alibi for the day of Amy's disappearance airtight? He had been guiding a client, a wealthy businessman from out of state, to Fremont Peak. The client, a verifiable witness, confirmed their ascent and descent. However, the window of time for the alleged incident, when Amy would have vanished, was narrow. Could Steve have committed a crime and then returned to his guiding duties, maintaining an outward calm? Such a scenario, while unsettling, was not impossible. As the investigation intensified, so too did the public's whispers. Small towns are often incubators of speculation, and Lander was no exception. Rumors, fueled by fear and uncertainty, began to circulate, casting a long shadow over Steve Bechtel. The local community, once sympathetic, now looked at him with a mix of pity and suspicion. The emotional toll on Steve was immense. He cooperated fully with law enforcement, submitting to polygraph examinations and extensive interviews, always maintaining his innocence. He continued to express his profound grief and bewilderment, advocating for the discovery of his wife. Yet the persistent questions from detectives and the knowing glances from townspeople slowly began to isolate him. The police, while having no direct evidence against Steve, continued to view him as a person of interest. There were reports, later brought to light, of alleged marital discord between Amy and Steve. Some friends and acquaintances suggested that their relationship had not been as idyllic as it seemed on the surface. These unconfirmed reports, while circumstantial, added another layer of complexity to the investigation, suggesting potential motives that had previously been overlooked. The focus on Steve Bechtel was not merely a matter of routine investigation. It was a deeply unsettling aspect of the case that highlighted the stark reality of how quickly suspicion can turn on those closest to a victim when answers are scarce. The authorities were meticulous, building a profile of Amy and Steve's life together, scrutinizing finances, personal relationships, and any potential conflicts. Every aspect of their shared existence was laid bare, dissected in the cold light of police inquiry. While Steve Bechtel was never charged in connection with Amy's disappearance, the intense scrutiny and the lingering cloud of suspicion left an indelible mark. The discovery of the car in the reservoir had not only confirmed a grave tragedy, but had also opened a Pandora's box of unanswered questions, turning a grieving husband into a primary suspect in the eyes of many, forever changing the trajectory of the investigation and the lives of those involved. The meticulous forensic examination of Amy's Ford Maverick after its recovery from Boysen Reservoir yielded an astonishing and deeply disturbing discovery that shattered any lingering doubts about foul play and propelled the investigation into a darker, more complex realm. Hidden within the engine compartment, cleverly concealed, investigators found a rusted, primitive metal object. It was, upon closer inspection, a crudely fashioned arrowhead. This was not a modern hunting broadhead, nor a relic of some forgotten accident. This arrowhead was ancient, an artifact consistent with Native American hunting tools, likely hundreds, if not thousands, of years old. Its presence in the engine, in a position that suggested it had been deliberately placed or perhaps even used to tamper with the vehicle, was inexplicable and profoundly unsettling. What was an ancient arrowhead doing in a modern car, submerged in a reservoir belonging to a missing nurse? The immediate implication was that this was a staged discovery, a bizarre and deliberate act intended either to mislead investigators or to send a cryptic, chilling message. The symbolic weight of an arrowhead, a weapon used for hunting, in a vehicle believed to be connected to a violent crime, was not lost on the seasoned detectives. This finding instantly transformed the case from a perplexing missing persons investigation into something far more sinister and ritualistic. Furthermore, the arrowhead was not the only anomaly. As forensic technicians delved deeper, they unearthed a piece of a CB radio antenna, meticulously severed and also concealed within the engine bay. CB radios, while less common by the early 90s, were still used by some, particularly those in remote areas, or by enthusiasts. The deliberate severing and concealment of the antenna, coupled with the arrowhead, painted a picture of calculated sabotage. Was the antenna cut to prevent Amy from calling for help, or was it another element of the elaborate staging, designed to throw investigators off track or to add to the perplexing symbolism? The combined discovery of the arrowhead and the antenna fragment was profoundly perplexing. It suggested a level of premeditation and a macabre creativity that went beyond a simple act of violence. This was not a crime of passion or a random accident. This was a deliberate, calculated act, steeped in a strange, almost ritualistic symbolism. The nature of these objects and their strategic placement pointed to a perpetrator who was not only cunning, but perhaps also sought to imbue the crime with a disturbing, almost theatrical element. The forensic teams meticulously processed these items, hoping to extract any trace of DNA, fingerprints, or other microscopic evidence that might link them to an individual. However, the long immersion in the reservoir had thoroughly eroded any such fragile clues. The rust on the arrowhead, the corrosion on the antenna fragment, while providing texture to the mystery, offered little in the way of direct identification. The focus shifted to understanding the possible meaning behind these artifacts. Investigators consulted with local historians and cultural experts, attempting to decipher the significance of an ancient arrowhead in such a modern crime. Was it a signature, a taunt, a desperate attempt to frame someone, or something else? The theories were numerous, each more disturbing than the last. Could the perpetrator have an interest in Native American artifacts, Or was this a crude attempt to mimic such a connection? The possibility that the arrowhead was meant to evoke a sense of ancient, untraceable evil was considered, a way to make the crime seem primal and inexplicable. The presence of these objects added layers of psychological complexity to the case. It suggested a killer who was not only brutal but also intellectually manipulative, someone who reveled in the creation of a puzzle, a perverse challenge to those who sought to uncover the truth. The discovery of the arrowhead and the severed antenna irrevocably altered the course of the investigation, transforming it into a chilling descent into the unknown, a journey marked by strange symbols and unanswered questions that hinted at a perpetrator far more sophisticated and disturbing than initially imagined. The perplexing discoveries within the submerged Ford Maverick, the ancient arrowhead, and the severed CB antenna effectively shattered the initial understanding of Amy Wroe Bechtel's disappearance and redirected the investigation toward the chilling possibility of an elaborate, staged crime. These weren't mere accidental findings. They were deliberate placements, almost theatrical in their execution, forcing investigators to confront a perpetrator who was not only violent but also deeply manipulative and perhaps even symbolic in their acts. The initial theory of a simple accident or even a spontaneous act of violence began to crumble under the weight of these bizarre details. The presence of an ancient arrowhead, so out of context, suggested a calculated attempt to mislead, to inject confusion into the case. Was it meant to evoke a sense of primordial evil, a connection to the untamed wilderness, thereby diverting suspicion from a human perpetrator? Or was it a macabre signature, a personal fetish of the killer, left behind as a twisted calling card? The severed CB antenna further compounded the enigma. In an era before widespread cell phone use, a CB radio could have been a lifeline in remote Wyoming. Its deliberate disabling suggested a desire to isolate Amy, to prevent any cry for help. But why conceal it in the engine bay alongside an arrowhead? The sheer effort involved in these acts, combined with the careful submergence of the car, pointed to a meticulous, cold-blooded killer who took great pains to obscure the truth and perhaps even delight in the creation of a confounding mystery. Detectives considered the psychological profile of such a perpetrator. This was not an opportunistic killer. This was someone who planned, who thought ahead, who possibly even harbored a perverse enjoyment of the puzzle they were constructing for law enforcement. The staging of the scene, if it was indeed staged, indicated a degree of intelligence and cunning that made the case even more daunting. This individual was attempting to control the narrative, even from beyond the crime itself. The narrative now shifted from understanding what happened to Amy to understanding who could commit such a calculated and strange act. The focus was no longer solely on the timeline of Amy's last movements or the physical evidence from the car itself, but on the mind behind these perplexing artifacts. Who in Lander or the surrounding areas would possess such an unusual combination of knowledge, perhaps an interest in ancient artifacts, coupled with the means and motivation to commit murder and stage a scene? The possibility of a serial offender, someone with a history of unusual or symbolic crimes, was considered. However, there were no similar unsolved cases in the immediate vicinity that matched this distinct modus operandi. The arrow's age and origin led some to speculate about a possible connection to indigenous communities, but this line of inquiry ultimately led to no concrete suspects, serving more to deepen the mystique than provide answers. The absence of Amy's body, despite the car's discovery, remained the most agonizing component of the entire case. Without her remains, definitive answers about the cause of death, The precise time of death and the full extent of the crime remained elusive. The reservoir had given up one secret, but it stubbornly held onto the most crucial one. The investigation became a desperate search for more than just a body. It became a quest to understand the twisted psychology of a killer who seemed to taunt them with riddles. The case of Amy Wroe Bechtel, once a straightforward missing person report, had spiraled into a chilling true crime saga, forever marked by the inexplicable presence of an ancient arrowhead and a deliberately disabled antenna, artifacts that whispered of a calculated evil lurking beneath the surface of a quiet Wyoming town. The mystery of these objects continued to haunt investigators, a silent testament to the cunning and depravity of an unknown killer who had meticulously crafted a scene designed to conceal the horrific truth and leave a trail of breadcrumbs that only led deeper into the dark, cold waters of the unknown.